Why is there so little to buy right now in Brisbane? In today's episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast, we are going to be unpacking listing volumes, which areas have more properties available for sale and which areas have the tightest supply. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Brisbane Property Podcast with your hosts Melinda and Scott Jennison.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Brisbane Property Podcast with Scott and Melinda Jennison. And today one thing we want to talk about and help people understand is why is there so little to buy in Brisbane?
And we are very thankful to Pauline. Big shout out to Pauline, who works with us over in the Philippines. She has compiled a lot of data for us to share specifically with you. This is an exclusive here on the Brisbane Property Podcast, and we are breaking down by postcode which areas across all of Greater Brisbane have the tightest supply and which areas have a lot more options for buyers. And of course, if you are a regular listener on this podcast, you will know without a doubt that we often talk about supply or listing volumes. We talk about new supply and total supply. And we talk about the fact that when we've got a situation of very tight supply or low supply at the same time as high buyer demand, that's when we see prices increase and escalate. And on the contrary, when we have a situation where there's very high supply without the corresponding buyer demand, we often see price softening. Now, of course, Brisbane as a property market has seen month-on-month price growth across many segments of the market since March 2023 now. So it's been a lot of positive growth. However, that's not the case in all subsections of the Brisbane market, and Brisbane's not a single property market. So we're going to take a bigger deep dive today, and hopefully there's a lot of value that you're going to extract from this episode.
You had to think about your dates then, because
the
time seems to be flicking away, and we're already in the start early on in 2025. So I know, as you mentioned, people do tune in and hear us regularly talk about data and information, and they also hear us talking and thanking Pauline, as you just did. An incredible job pulling all this together, and we do thank Pauline again. SQM Research, Melinda, just help explain to our listeners what SQM Research listing data actually means, and how does it help us understand what the property market is doing in Brisbane?
Look, it's one of the data sets that we commonly reference when we're looking at property markets across Australia, but more specifically here in Brisbane. SQM Research provides information updated monthly that helps us to understand the total volume of properties that are available for sale in a given market. You can track that across Australia. You can track that across each capital city, across each sub-region within a capital city, and across each postcode. So there's so much valuable information within their data. And this is free data that I'm referencing as well. So if you navigate to the SQM Research site, you can actually extract information on the total volume of listings, which is the total number of properties advertised for sale on a monthly basis in a given property market. So it helps us to understand how much stock there is, not just total stock, but it also breaks it down into new listings. That's properties that have been for sale and listed in the last 30 days, and subsequent timeframes right up to over 180 days. So you can see how long properties in certain markets have been on the market, and that often shows trends in terms of more properties becoming available for sale, more properties sitting on the market for longer, and you can really extract a lot of value when you really understand those local markets and what those changes in trends do show.
So with some of the information we'll share today and some of the data that Pauline has pulled together for us, when we talk about high listing volumes compared to tight listing volumes, what are we looking at there, and what does that basically tell us?
Well, in an area which has high listing volumes, it simply means that there's a lot more properties for sale in that particular location. So it gives buyers a lot more choice. The complete opposite of that is tight listing volumes or low listing volumes. And that is an area where there's very few options for buyers. So there's very few properties available for sale. And we are going to focus predominantly today on the new listings. That's properties that were listed for sale in the last 30 days. And then also on total listings, which is the total number of properties in that particular market that are still for sale, whether they are new or old, it's all combined together. So there's some interesting trends within the data sets that we have.
So it does come back to that supply and demand side of it. And obviously the higher the listing volumes, the more choice people have then.
Correct.
When they start looking at property.
I will make a very specific point before we go on. We are not talking about demand today. You need boots on the ground to understand demand in local markets. You need to be going to properties, inspecting properties and seeing how many people turn up. That is a determinant of demand in a local market right now. So no data can really measure that in the same way that boots on the ground can measure that. And of course, that's what a team of buyers agents will be able to do when we know what's happening in a local market and we overlay that with what we're seeing in terms of listing volumes. That's going to help us to determine the direction of that local market. And obviously that's where we add so much value for clients who partner with us, especially for investors, but also for home buyers. So they know what is the competition likely to be and how do we strategically enable them to put forward a more competitive offer.
Yeah, so it comes down to, as you just mentioned, the strategy side of it. And as we do here, our team at Streamline Property Buyers, we're out and about and we gauge how many people are coming to open inspections, how many people are at auctions, how many people are bidding, all those types of things, so we can understand that demand side of it. As Melinda said, that's on the ground, and we can gauge that and keep track of that, comparing that then to the listing numbers as well. Mm-hmm. So high listing volume areas, can we break it down a little bit? And you've got some information here to be able to share to our clients, which is our listeners, I should say. Which Brisbane suburbs currently have the highest listing volumes?
Yeah, look, I've broken this down into different city council regions because I know a lot of our listeners often talk about different council regions across Brisbane. Mm-hmm. And for those that don't know Brisbane well, Brisbane City Council is the largest council region Australia-wide. So it does include a high volume of suburbs within one city council region. But we've also got Ipswich City Council, Logan City Council, Redlands City Council and Moreton Bay City Council. So these are all different council regions. So we're going to talk about the supply of listings in each of those council regions. So if we start with the Brisbane City Council region, the postcode that has the highest volume of new listings and total listings is postcode 4306, and that includes suburbs including Corunna Downs, Lake Manchester, Mount Crosby. So these are suburbs that are to the west of the CBD between sort of Brisbane and Ipswich. When we look at the total new listings, and this is the most recent data available on the SQM Research website, 276 properties were available for sale across postcode 4306 and 649 total property listings in this region. So buyers looking in this location have a lot of choice. And obviously, that's something to be aware of if you are shopping in this market.
It's interesting though. I mean, they are further away from the CBD, those areas. And then if you come in a little bit closer, the next one from that is postcode 4101.
Yep.
Now, a different market.
Very different market.
So we're looking at places like Highgate Hill, South Brisbane, West End. Those sort of places, when you look in there, 77 properties.
New listings. Mm-hmm, that's right.
It's a different market, okay? It's more of a high density market.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's when you come into your units and that sort of space in those areas as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we also saw total listings in those areas coming in at 269 at the time of measurement, which was in December. So they're higher areas of higher listing volumes in Brisbane. So postcode 4306 and 4101. I'll also say that if we're looking at the total volume of properties available for sale, postcode 4006, which includes Bowen Hills, Fortitude Valley and Newstead, slips into a very high supply market as well. And there's 292 properties currently for sale in that market, and that's total listing volumes as well. So postcode 40064101, these are the markets that have much higher density dwellings, and they're high supply markets right now with high listing volumes. And postcode 4306, the markets that are lower density markets, but also very high volumes of properties available for sale at the moment.
And it's interesting because, as you mentioned, and knowing Brisbane very well, those areas, as you touched on, Fortitude Valley, Newstead, Highgate Hill, all those areas, very high density, which is going to push those numbers up as well.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to briefly run through some of the areas in Greater Brisbane, other council regions that also have very high supply at the moment. So postcode 4207 in the Logan City Council region, a lot of properties listed in new listings, 186 and 498 total properties available. This postcode includes suburbs such as Beenleigh, Eagleby, Logan Village, Yarrabilba, Jimboomba. I beg your pardon, not Jimboomba. That's the next postcode I'm going to discuss with you. So Yarrabilba, Logan Village, Eagleby, Beenleigh. These areas are also areas with higher listing volumes right now, comparatively speaking, when we're looking at the rest of Brisbane. So buyers will have more choice across these locations. Also, postcode 4280, which will include the likes of Jimboomba. There's also high new listings coming through in that particular postcode. So obviously, there's new listings and total listings. There's more new listings in postcode 4280 than there are in postcode 4207, but there's actually more total listings that are coming through in postcode 4207. So there's more stock accumulating in that market. So again, be aware of this if these are markets that you're shopping in. In Ipswich, we've got Marburg coming in as the tightest supply market of new listings, literally 2 properties available for sale. In fact, I've jumped to the tight supply instead of strong supply. So if we look at the alternative end of the market, we've got suburbs including postcode 4306 being the areas with the highest supply. So that's including suburbs such as Ripley, Willowbank, etc. So these areas, Ripley, South Ripley, Pine Mountain, 276 properties, new listings just listed within the last 30 days, and 649 properties on the market in total. So that's a lot for postcode 4306. And there's a lot of suburbs that fall into that particular postcode.
It'll be a big difference. And I know when you jumped the gun a little bit earlier just then, when people hear those numbers, and just keep those numbers in the back of your mind, when you're talking 191, 279, those sort of listings, and when we go to the tight side of things, you'll see the difference that we're talking about as well.
Yeah. So looking at the Moreton Bay region now, so we've got postcode 4510 as the area with the most properties available for sale. So that's including Caboolture South, Upper Caboolture, that whole region. 178 properties newly listed throughout the most recent month, and 461 properties in total. So a lot of buyer choice in those regions as well. And finally, in Redlands, we've got the Island regions. So Russell Island, Macleay Island, postcode 4184. These are the areas with the most properties available for sale. We've got 130 new listings and 930 total listings in postcode 4184. So lots of options for buyers in those locations as well.
So when we talk about the high listing side of it, what are some of the reasons these areas have more properties available for sale than other areas?
Well, first of all, I will point out the fact that these are raw numbers, and we haven't actually overlaid these with the number of properties that are in these locations. So buyers must be aware of that. If there's a lot more properties within these specific locations, we might naturally expect higher volumes in these locations. So Another layer of data interpretation would be to determine what percentage of the properties that are available in that location are currently up for sale. But that is something that we reserve for clients, not necessarily something that we're going to be sharing for free in terms of all of that information at a suburb level. That said, when you've got a number of properties in an area that are trending upwards in terms of those listing volumes, it can mean a number of things. It can mean that there's more sellers that are looking to get out of the market. The market may be becoming less affordable, so there might be fewer buyers in that market, transacting in that market. It might be that seller expectations have moved ahead of the market, in that buyers are no longer prepared to meet the seller's expectations, so they don't sell and listing volumes continue to increase. So these are some of the reasons why we might see those listing volumes trending upwards over time. But typically it simply means there's more sellers in that particular location that want to sell their property for whatever reason. And that's why we see those listing volumes increase.
So is it the impact then on the buyers in the suburb? Is it a positive? Is it a negative? When you look at the market conditions?
Well, again, it's relative to the number of properties in that particular location. But generally speaking, across the board, when buyers have more choice, that's a very positive thing for buyers, because you get to actually choose from multiple available properties instead of very few properties. When there's more properties available for sale than there are buyers in a market, typically the negotiation power falls back to the buyer rather than the seller. So when there's more listings trending upward, typically we can see more negotiation happening, and sellers can often accept a price that is slightly lower just to actually get a buyer. Now, that doesn't always happen, but these are markets that we can tell there's more opportunity for good buying when listings are trending upwards, because generally there's fewer buyers in those markets depending on the supply and demand metrics at a local level.
Okay, so tight listing volumes then. If we have a look at that, what sort of areas, if we follow the same through Brisbane to start with, what sort of areas are we looking at that have got the tight listings?
Yeah, the tightest market for new properties available for sale in Brisbane City Council region is actually Chandler. There was one property in the last 30 days listed. Now, other very tight supply markets include suburbs such as Mackenzie and Nathan, and also 17 Mile Rocks. All of these locations had less than 6 properties listed in the last 30 days. So if you're a buyer in some of these markets, you're probably going to be waiting for something of quality to become available, because there's very tight supply in terms of new listings. In terms of total listings, a lot of the same suburbs actually hit this list. So Nathan, 5 listings in total across the entire suburb at the time this data was collected. Chandler, 6 listings in total. And then other suburbs, including Belmont, 16 listings in total. So some of these may be newer listings, but some of them may have been sitting on the market a little longer. But at a suburb level, these are some very low values, and that's important to be aware of if you are a shopper in these areas.
Comparing that to the 200 and something, 180, I think it was 270 odd. There's a lot of difference when you're going down to single digits.
Yeah, and look, as I said, it's important to keep in mind that we haven't done the evaluation of the number of properties that are available in a particular postcode when we're reporting on these figures. These are raw numbers only, and buyers should be aware that if there's 6 listings but only 300 properties in that location, it's very different to 6 listings and only 50 properties in that location. So be aware of the stock, and generally you will know if you're a buyer in the market whether you're shopping in a market where there's a lot of available properties or a lot of properties just by doing a local drive-through, or whether you're in a market that there might be acreage properties and therefore fewer of them available.
Yeah, and I think that's people that don't know Brisbane, a quick explanation on that as well. Chandler is generally larger blocks of land, I almost call them like a little farm. You're talking acreage, bigger blocks of land. Some of the other areas we're talking about are probably in estates.
Yeah.
So your Jimboombas and those sort of areas, you've got new estates. So there's a lot more property on a smaller block of land, and there's more choice then, there's more properties available, or there's more properties then, obviously, and then more becomes available because of that, the size of the land, the properties as well in the estates.
It's a good point, and that's why, therefore, overlaying the number of properties that are available for sale with the buyers that would be in that market looking for that particular product is critical to understand the direction that prices might move, because looking at listings alone without understanding demand, it's quite irrelevant. It really needs to be a match of both of these equations. But we're doing half of the research for you, so when you're out and about, you do the other half and you can match that up and determine the direction of a market in a particular location.
And a very easy one to explain is when you look at places like Highgate Hill, South Brisbane, and those areas, generally we're talking about units, more properties, more supply.
Yeah, so the tightest supply in the Logan region is in the Tamborine area, so postcode 4270. Only 5 new listings available there and 35 in total. Now, that is a little bit further west as well. It's not as heavily populated. So, again, the number of properties available for sale in that area is probably proportional to the number of properties in the area. Logan Home, however, very tight supply in terms of total listings, only 35 properties there. Looking at some of the other areas where there's tight supply, we've got areas in postcode 4129, Logan Home, we've got Underwood, we've got Shayla Park, Logan Lee. These areas are all tight supply in terms of new listings, and also total listings, very tight in areas like Meadowbrook, Shayla Park, and Logan Lee. So any of these areas, you'll generally find there's less choice for buyers in the market right now.
So if you move out to Ipswich, again, pretty tight out that way. Marburg.
Yeah, Marburg,
two?
only 2 properties listed in the last 30 days. Other areas such as Riverview and Rosewood, again, really tight supply in terms of new listings with less than 10 properties listed just in the last 30 days. And then you've got areas that are really tight in terms of total listings, and that includes suburbs such as Riverview and Marburg. Again, so postcode 4303, where there's fewer than 30 properties in total available on the market.
Moreton Bay?
Yeah, Moreton Bay, not surprisingly, a country town tops the list in terms of the lowest supply, and that's Wamuran. However, what was interesting is that there's some other markets much closer in, including the likes of Peachtree, even Daybra, where there's very few new listings coming to the market, and these are much more popular areas. Daybra a little bit more rural, but Peachtree certainly a more suburban area, so a very tight supply in that area. In terms of total listings, areas like Rothwell, really low total listings supply. Areas such as Eaton's Hill and Peachtree and Arana Hills also hit the list in terms of the tightest supply in the Moreton Bay region.
Very tight in those areas. And those people that might have been to the markets down in Milton to buy strawberries, most of them come from Wamuran.
He does.
I do remember the guy always yelling out, WAMU-ran. Get your strawberries from Wamuran.
That's true, very true. And let's wrap up with Redlands. So the tightest supply markets in Redlands right now, Thornside, both in terms of new listings and total listings, very tight in Thornlands, and that tops the list in terms of the Redlands region.
So obviously tight listings create challenges for buyers.
Yeah.
What about driving up prices? Like the competition, is that going to push the prices up and things like that?
Yeah, providing the demand exists in that market for that product type. Of course, the more buyers you have looking for a product, if there's less of that, it actually creates competition, and that's what can potentially drive prices up. So it is important for buyers to be aware of the conditions in the market, because if you find something that's the perfect property, but there's 10 other buyers that are interested in that property, of course, it's likely that the competition will drive that price up. So yes, listing volumes can have a big impact on how you behave as a buyer or the actions that you might take as a buyer, especially through the negotiation process. And in fact, if there's very few listings, quite often we talk about the fact that you might not even have the ability to negotiate, because it may become a multiple offer situation, or it might be a property that's listed for sale by auction where all of the buyers compete for the single product. And of course, that can often push the price up as well.
are there any trends or patterns when we look at the data that suggest areas are transitioning between high and tight?
Look, it's a good question. The good thing about the SQM Research site is that you can track the long-term trends of listings over time. Now, we often talk about what's happening here in Brisbane compared to other capital city markets, and if you have a look at some of those SQM Research listing trends, in markets like Sydney and Melbourne, you can actually see that the current monthly listing volumes are back at or above the long-term trends, whereas here in Brisbane, for many areas, you can see that they're still well below those long-term trends. So I think tracking listing volumes is going to give you some perspective around the market as a whole in terms of how many properties are available for sale. And I do think in Brisbane, those listing trends are almost a reflection of the lack of new dwellings coming to the market as well. As our population has continued to grow, that stock is being absorbed. We talk about the fact that sales volumes have been higher than previous 12-month periods, and that's been a fact throughout most of 2024 in our market updates, and that's a reflection of buyer demand. So that indicates that a lot of that stock that's being purchased is actually, taking away those listings that are available. But as we keep pointing out, not all properties are going to be, or not all locations, not all postcodes, not all suburbs are going to be similar, and it's important to understand what's happening at a local level.
There's different implications for buyers, sellers, things like that. So obviously for buyers, there's going to be more strategy. Obviously, there's different ways you can look at things, and there's recommendations, and we work through with that with clients as well. Different strategies when there's tight listing volumes. For sellers, when there's high listing volumes, obviously they want to stand out and they want to attract the buyers. So there's different strategies again that you can use when you're a buyer or when you're a seller to either buy in a high when are really tight, or when there's a lot of properties, you want to stand out from the competition when you want to sell. So keep that in mind. You need to make sure that you can change and adapt to different areas depending on what sort of supply is there as well.
Yeah. And look, I think just trying to wrap up, what is the meaning of all of this? Why are we talking about supply so much? Why do listing volumes actually matter? Based on the listing volumes data that we have right now in Brisbane, there's never been a time where listings have been as tight as they are now. There's never been a time where we've had such low listing volumes. And this has significant implications because at the same time as listing volumes have gone down compared to our long-term trends, we've seen more and more people come into Southeast Queensland, more and more people have migrated to Brisbane, and therefore there is increased demand for housing. And listing volumes are a reflection of how many properties are available for sale. So when we see that stock decreasing at a time where demand is increasing, and one of the elements of demand is that population growth movement, and there's other elements which we've talked about on previous podcast episodes, but these are the things that often cause market shifts. Now, I will encourage listeners to head to the SQM Research site to have a look at listing volumes at a local market level so you can understand what's happening in the local market that you're looking to buy into. That's going to give you an understanding of how competitive that market might be. But of course, turning up to the open homes and seeing how many other buyers are turning up alongside you is going to be the best predictor of how much competition you're going to likely have when putting forward any offers on properties.
So a lot of data, a lot of information. I think some of the key takeaways we have to look at here is how different areas perform compared to other areas. Yep. It's not, as we talk about it, one market's not, it's not one market, and there's different markets within markets within markets and so on. And if you look at different areas, what is actually there as well. So when we're breaking it down between houses, units, what's in the local area, how much supply is there as well, to understand that's I think that's really important for people to understand that as well. And knowing the market, as you mentioned, understanding the demand as well, getting out, seeing how many people are there. I think it's critical to overlay that with what the listings are and how much supply is there.
Yeah, local knowledge really trumps anything that data can tell us when it comes to selecting the right property in the particular location. So we do encourage everybody to get out and have a look at the market they're buying into. And if you can't do it yourself, engage someone that's going to provide that professional guidance for you.
Perfect. hopefully it's been good information. Again, thanks to Pauline. Appreciate your work as always, pulling all these numbers together. There is a lot more information that we had here. Obviously, we didn't have enough time to share every suburb and go through everything. We had to break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of work there. So hopefully it's been helpful. From myself, as I normally do, I let Melinda close it out. And until next time, thanks very much for listening. Take care and bye for now.
Yes, thank you for joining us once again on the Brisbane Property Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's giving you some insights into some of the data that we would look at in order to advise our buyers on a professional capacity. So we hope it will help you as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to share this episode with friends and family. Let them know about some of the content that we discuss on the Brisbane Property Podcast. It really does help buyers to steer themselves in the right direction. As always, we'd love for you to leave us a review on your favorite podcast player as well. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, and leave us a review if you're listening on any podcast players. Thank you so much for your time again, and we look forward to speaking with you again next week. Bye for now.